Hi there, welcome to today's video. I'm Natasha of Natasha Miller Creates, and today we're going to be talking about the second part of the Stamping in Your Bullet Journal series, which is looking at stamp material as well as quality and how you can navigate using stamps of different quality, obviously. If you're ordering stamps online, it can be very difficult knowing the quality of the stamp until you receive it. Less expensive stamps tend to have a softer material, which can be a challenge to stamp with, but today we'll look at some techniques that you can work through that. I'm going to go through some of my favorite brands that have the thicker acrylic or the thicker photopolymer stamp material, and we can go from there. I do want to touch on the fact that not all stamps are created equal. Just because it says the material is acrylic doesn't mean it's going to be lower quality, doesn't mean it's going to be higher quality. Same with photopolymer. Doesn't mean it's going to be the best, doesn't mean it's going to be the worst. It depends on the actual makeup of the stamp material itself. Stamp composition is not my expertise, but I have a variety of stamps and I've worked with a variety of stamps over the years, so I have come to familiarize myself on the best ways to use the different kinds of stamps. So I know which companies and organizations will have the softer stamps versus which ones will have a little bit harder stamps that tend to be more favored for their quality. I also do want to say, just because stamps are expensive doesn't mean they're good quality. I find stamps are just expensive, period. But the reason why I just love using stamps and will continue to use stamps is because you can reuse them. So unlike stickers where you're one and done, stamps you're going to be able to use it time and time and time again. So let's get into looking at the different materials. I grabbed a bunch of different stamps that we can take a look at because there is a large variety. We have our wood-mounted stamps. So this is a stamp from Eric Small Things. This was a stamp set from Archer and Olive that was letter stamps. There's a fun alphabet one on Amazon as well. This is your rubber stamps, your cling mount rubber stamps. And then we have our acrylic and photopolymer stamps. So we're going to start off with the simpler stamps, and you'll see what I mean by that shortly, but we're going to get into the wood mounted stamps. Now, wood mounted stamps are your traditional, I'm going to say old school stamps. This is how stamps used to come on these wooden blocks. They tend to run expensive because the wood is heavy, so if you're getting them shipped, it is going to add to the shipping weight, and they tend to be pretty good quality. I don't think I have any wooden stamps that are any issues. That's the rubber that they use. It's very similar to the cling mounted rubber. The only difference is these guys come on wood. This guy you can add to an acrylic block. Now I touch on an acrylic block and we will get into the importance of an acrylic block in this video as well. But for now, let's just talk about the different kinds of stamps. We have our rubber wood mounted stamps, and then we have our rubber cling mounted stamps. For acrylic stamps, these work a little bit differently. These are photopolymer, these are acrylic. Now, I've seen in discussions online that some people swear by photopolymer stamps, some people swear by acrylic stamps, and nobody's wrong. It's not so much to do with how expensive they are. I mean, stamps in general are expensive regardless of where you get them from. It's just important to understand how to use it based on what the material is. Let's put these to the side. For now, we're going to touch on these. These are less expensive than some of the other stamps that I have, and I'm going to show you why. Okay, so the less expensive stamps tend to be floppy. As you can see, there's a lot of give, there's a lot of just bend to it. Again, be careful doing this with your stamps because it can damage them. These just have a lot of give. And so when you're stamping, you're going to want to take that into consideration. These are from Recollections at Michael's. I wanted to show these as well. And these two are, they're still floppy, maybe not as floppy because they are a bit smaller, but these have a lot of give too. They're soft and they're squishy. So we're going to get into our Ultimate stamp set and take a look. As you can see, this is a well-used stamp set. So this is still floppy, but it is a lot thicker. So if we pull out one of these, the Ultimate stamp is marginally thicker. The base of the stamp is marginally thicker than the Recollections. And if we grab one of these, again, you're gonna see how much thicker that base is. I don't even know how I can show you how much, like, The base of the Altenew is thicker, and this stamp set is more expensive than these guys were. So that's something to keep in mind. There is like the quality of your stamps. If you've been around my channel for a while, you're going to know that one of my favorite brands is Studio Calico. So if we pull out a Studio Calico stamp set, it's still going to have that floppiness, but it's taking a lot less to flap this one. This one keeps flapping. This one stops pretty quickly. So this is a thinner acrylic, and I can't speak to the quality. Different manufacturers are going to have different quality acrylic, but it's definitely, the base is thicker on the more expensive brands. So that's just something to keep in mind. Again, it doesn't mean this is worse than this guy. It just means it's easier to stamp with the acrylic that's a little bit thicker versus the ones that are thinner. I'm going to show you how you can work with both of them, but I just wanted you to keep that in mind. Then we're going to get into the photopolymer. So this is another favorite brand of mine, the Sassy Club. And while I'm not a chemist, I guess, I can't tell you straight off the bat what makes this one photopolymer and what makes this one acrylic. But if we do the wobble test, neither of them are wobbling too much. So this is the photopolymer. And there's like almost no wiggle on that. And again, it's a nice and thick base. That's why people like the photopolymer as well. I don't know if photopolymer is always a safe bet to go with. So for example, if you read a stamp description and it says photopolymer stamps, it still doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the thicker stamps. It could just mean it's used with photopolymer, but it's a thinner base. It's really tough to know which brands to go with. For me, I tend to go with Studio Calico and Ali Edwards, as well as Heidi Swap. They all belong to the same company that oversees them. So Inked Brands oversees them. You've got Ranger. Ranger has really good stamps. Stampers Anonymous and those guys. Those are really fun stamps. These are Ranger Dilutions. These are really fun to work with. Really great quality. So if you're going to the craft store and you're shopping around in the bargain bin, you're going to get a thinner acrylic stamp that's going to be a little bit harder to work with, a little less forgiving. But as I said, I'm going to show you the difference in all these stamps. One more thing I quickly wanted to touch on was stamp quality and cleaning your stamps. Now, as you can see, I have done a terrible job of maintaining the stamp set and not cleaning it. All it does is eventually it'll lose its stickiness, and what you can do is, I have some stamp cleaner. Now this stamp cleaner is super old, and this is just the Recollections brand, but if you clean your stamps with the stamp cleaner and let it dry, it will get its stickiness back. The other thing I wanted to touch on was stamp staining. Over time, some stamps can stain. This doesn't really change the quality of the stamp. It doesn't change how the stamp works. It just means that they look a little bit yellow versus the clear. Now, these stamps are about the same age. These stamps are about the same age. So, or at least I got them at around the same time. But that's just something to keep in mind. Again, this I would say is a thinner acrylic, and so you will see that with the thinner acrylic. It's somewhere in between this guy and the Studio Calico. Again, it doesn't mean it's a bad quality necessarily. It just means whatever material they use, it's just aging over time, and it still works. So don't let that turn you off of stamping. The other thing to note is that if you watch my previous video on stamp inks for your bullet journal, you will know that I touched on stamping with a solvent ink. A solvent ink is going to stain your stamps, but again, it'll just stain them the color versus having ink left over. So best reason to clean your stamps is so that when you do use different colors, you're not going to get carryover. And I tend to use mostly black stamp ink, so it hasn't been an issue for me. The one time I do use color ink, I had a little bit of black smudging. So keep that in mind. We are now going to get into acrylic blocks and how to use the different quality stamps. I did want to talk about acrylic blocks for a second. Now, as you can see, these guys come in a variety of different shapes and sizes. And the reason being, you want to match your acrylic block to the size of your stamp. That way you're better able to get even pressure down on the image, and you're going to get a cleaner image. If if you're using a giant block with a smaller stamp, you're going to end up with uneven lines. Some lines are going to be thicker than others. And so ideally, you want to match your stamp to the acrylic block. If you are just getting into stamping and you don't want a million acrylic blocks yet, there is a way that you can stamp without matching the stamp completely. It's just going to take a little bit more practice and a little bit more finesse, but using the right shaped acrylic block is going to be very helpful in your stamping journey. With that said, we're going to start looking at the different kinds and qualities of stamps. Okay, I'm going to use my favorite stamp pad to show you the differences in the stamps. Now, the rubber stamps tend to be a really good quality. The biggest reason why people tend to move away from the rubber stamps is it's hard to see because the wood's in the way, so it's harder to line up your letters. So for example, grabbing the Archer and Olive one, if we just stamp out hello, for example, without getting my head completely in the way, I'm going to stamp out hello, and it gets a little tougher to line the stamps up completely because of how the rubber stamp is situated, how the block is situated. So rubber stamps, or at least wood-mounted rubber stamps, aren't meant to be perfectionist, if that makes sense. If you're looking for perfection, you might want to try I can't get this out with my nails. You might want to try an acrylic set instead. I completely messed that up. I wasn't able to grab the stamp with my nails. So that is a wood-mounted rubber stamp. They're super fun to play with. They're super fun to experiment with. The only issue I have, and sometimes that's the aesthetic that I'm going for, but it's hard to line up the letters because you can't exactly see where the last letter is and where the next letter needs to go. And more importantly, where exactly the stamp is located on the wood. A lot of the times it is even, but it's still kind of hard to line it up. But again, if that's the aesthetic you're going for, then it's perfect. The next one I wanted to get into is the cling mounted rubber stamps. We're gonna match up our block. Now, you're not always going to match your block perfectly, so don't worry. I find that if the block's a little bigger than the stamp, that works out best. When you're inking your stamp, you are going to just tap the stamp. If you rub on the stamp like this, you're not going to get an even... It's light, but ink isn't evenly distributed. So if you just tap the ink onto the stamp, you're going to get a more even distribution. So as you can see, that was rubbing the ink on, and this was tapping the ink on. Much more of an even distribution, cleaner lines, and just a better stamped image. So if we were to use a smaller acrylic block, firstly, you're going to get ink all over your fingers. And then we just tap, tap, tap. The rubber, these kinds of cling mounted stamps are a little bit more forgiving, but as you can see, we aren't able to apply even pressure throughout the stamp, so there are bits that aren't quite fully stamped. As a side note, as a workaround, you can go in with a pen and just fill that in. It's not a big deal. Sometimes it happens. So you just make it work. Okay, so to show you the more expensive acrylic stamps, I'm going to show you these first versus the less expensive ones so that you get a better idea of how the less expensive ones, or the technique you need to work with the less expensive ones. So grabbing just this heart and sticking it on the block, the smooth side of the block, and you're going to be able to see if there's enough ink on the stamp, on the acrylic stamps, which is so great and makes it a lot easier. So again, make sure we're applying even pressure. So that's pretty straightforward. That's a very clean stamped image. It's a lot harder to get a cleaner image with the fuller stamp images, just because you want to make sure that you're getting enough ink there. And when you stamp down, you want to make sure that you're getting the stamp down flat. If you roll it down, you're not going to get an even, clean image. So that is the stamped image. As you can see, there are bits that didn't go through, but that's part of the design. So very easy to stamp with, very forgiving. You're gonna find that is the case with a lot of the thicker acrylics. So Sassy Club, for example, Studio Calico, Alta New, those stamp companies you're going to find very easy to stamp with. So I'm going to stamp with this guy. As you can see, it's yellowing, but I wanted to show you that quality of the stamp is still fine. It's just that it is yellow. So again, this isn't quite as thick as the other guys we've just stamped with. So it still works fine. It's just a little older. The material didn't hold out over time as well as some of the others. This set is from a Happy Planner, I believe. This one's actually very challenging to stamp with, and I'll show you why. This is the similar quality to a Hampton Art and then the Recollections. As you can see, there's the floppiness that I was talking about. Okay, so this is the one that was super floppy, or floppier, I guess. When you're stamping with these, especially the ones that are softer, if I were to apply the same pressure that I do to the acrylics, you're gonna see what happens. It's smudging on the sides and it's already bleeding. That's not the paper, that's not the ink. It's the same paper, it's the same ink that we used in every single one of these stamps. It's just that the pressure is different. So when you are using a less expensive stamp or stamp with thinner acrylic, what you're going to do is you're going to want to be very gentle. And that's how you're going to get the stamped image. So this was using the same pressure that I used on the thicker acrylics and the photopolymers. But when you're stamping with the thinner material, you're going to want to make sure to be very, very gentle. And that's how you're going to get that clean image. So again, you can't always control the kind of stamps that you get, especially if you're ordering online. You're sticking within your budget, and this is what's in your budget. Not a problem. You just have to change your stamping technique. And I'm going to show you this guy too, because this guy was one of the first stamp sets I got for bullet journaling, and it drove me crazy. I had so much trouble. So while I'm having trouble pulling this up, you want to be very gentle pulling your stamp off of the plastic. Reason being, you don't want to stretch the stamp. They are pretty fragile, and if you stretch the stamp too much, you are going to warp the image, and then you won't be able to use it. At least even floppy like this, you're still going to be able to use it if you're using it gently, versus if you completely pull the stamp apart, you're not going to be able to use it anymore. So again, if I'm applying the same pressure as I did to the acrylic, that's what you end up with. And then if I'm going to be gentle, you're going to get a cleaner stamped image. Another thing to know, especially with the acrylic and the photopolymer stamps, is when you first get them, they might have a film on the stamp. This is normal. It's part of the manufacturing process. And so you have a few options of what you can do. One, you can wipe it down with some water, or you can use a baby wipe as well. I'm lazy, so my favorite thing to do is to ink the stamp as though I was going to stamp it first on a separate piece of paper, ink it again, and then stamp to my heart's content. So if you're not getting a clear, crisp image and you're using a brand new stamp set, that could be another reason. So just make sure to get that film off and you will be good to go. So that is today's video on the different kinds of stamp material, the acrylic blocks, and then ways that you can make sure you're getting use out of your stamps regardless of their material quality. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you have any questions at all, please do not hesitate to reach out down below. And please let me know if you have started considering stamping in your bullet journal. Let me know down in the comments below, and I will see you in the next one.